Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for our colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic. This is the closing session of the BHL annual conference. At the end of that conference, we can ask ourselves a question. What is the Biodiversity Heritage Library about? In my opinion, and from what I saw, especially during the BHL Open Day, BHL works by bringing together three main domains. The first one is the collections, the heritage collections, which are made available through digitization. The second one is related to the promotion of biodiversity towards a large audience. And the third one is cooperation. BHL only works thanks to the common activity of its members around the world. The previous presentation has shown the beautiful collections of the National Library Board of Singapore. It has also underlined the importance of promotion and transmission thanks to exhibitions or school programs. I would like now to put an emphasis on the third aspect, the cooperation. But maybe I will first present myself. I am Clément Oury. I am a curator at the library of the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, and I serve as acting head of conservation, restoration, and digitization service. You may wonder why someone from the museum has been asked to speak during that closing event. Well, there are two reasons. First, it's because we are sad we are not able to welcome BHL folks in Paris for a physical General Assembly. I would say in real life. This is related, of course, to the pandemic situation. But more importantly, it's because the museum on one end and the heritage and natural history institutions in Singapore on the other end have a lot in common. And more broadly, it's because France and Singapore have a lot in common. I will try to illustrate that. As I said, I want to speak about cooperation. And more especially, I would like to investigate how biodiversity literature and biodiversity collections could be used as a topic for cooperation, especially international cooperation. The ultimate goal of this cooperation will be twofold. First, underlining the value of the relationships between countries, in that case Singapore and France. And second, the goal would be to raise awareness towards the importance of biodiversity description and biodiversity preservation. To speak about that, I would first like to tell you a tale of two scientists and a tale of two friends, Pierre Médard-Diard and Alfred Duvaucel. Both men are naturalists from the very beginning of the 19th century. I will first introduce them along with a third protagonist, Sir Thomas Rutherford, but everyone in Singapore knows who is Thomas Rutherford. I will speak about what they collected, and I will speak also about their legacy. From this story, I will try to show how different stakeholders, the Natural History Museum of Singapore, the National Library Board of Singapore, the museum, the French Embassy in Singapore, how all these stakeholders have tried to promote cooperation. I will show the different initiatives to that end, such as the participation to an exhibition about Singapore natural history, or a partnership between France and Singapore for digitization, publishing, or video mapping installation. But first, let's start by digging a bit into history. I will present you Diard and Duvaucel. The first one, Alfred Duvaucel, is born in 1793. By the way, it's exactly the birth date of the museum in Paris itself. Pierre Diard, on the other hand, has almost the same age as Alfred Duvaucel. This is the one you can see on the left. The principal link between the two men is that they had connections with Georges Cuvier. Actually, Duvaucel was a stepson of Cuvier. Georges Cuvier is a famous naturalist and one of the fathers of paleontology. He was a professor at the museum. He was also the director of the museum for a few years. And he decided to send the two young men in India to study local specimens and collect them from the museum. The third character of this story is better known. It's Sir Thomas Rutherford. He is a British officer. He was Lieutenant Governor of Bencoolen, which is today in Indonesia. And he had a keen interest in natural sciences. When he came to Paris, he visited actually the Jardin des Plantes, within the museum, and he was amazed of what he saw. He says that after the Louvre, the Jardin des Plantes should be the second museum to see in Paris. In 1818, Raffles went to Calcutta, and he heard about these two Frenchmen, and he asked them to meet him in Calcutta. They discussed together, and they agreed to travel to the Far East. Raffles would deal with his various political and diplomatic missions, while Diard and Devaucel would be in charge of the collection and the description of species. And all the cost of the expedition, should be ensured by the British East India Company. At the end of the mission, the species should be equally shared between the French and the British. At least this is the version of the agreement remembered by Diard and Devaucel, because there was no written agreement. The travel started on December 1818. It is during this travel that Thomas Rutherford laid the foundation of Singapore, which explains why it is an important travel in Singapore memory. During this travel, Diard and Devaucel had a very active and far-ranging collecting activity. They hired drowsmen, hunters, taxidermists, and so on. And they collected quadrupeds, reptiles, birds, insects, and fishes. I will only give one example. On the top here, you can see a common tree shrew, which is a small mammal, which was first described by Diard. The collection activity was so successful that when they came back in Bencoolen, their ship was half full with specimens. Unfortunately, when they arrived in Bencoolen, they had a strong argument with Raffles. Raffles had apparently a different memory from their agreement. He wanted to have all the collections, as the British paid for everything. Even so, all the scientific work was done by Diard and Devaucel. Actually, it's hard to know who was right, because nothing was written. But in any case, Raffles was the governor, and he was able to enforce his own position. So our poor old fellows only obtained specimens when two other specimens of the same species already existed. Fortunately, they also apparently managed to smuggle few other specimens in their luggage. I said fortunately, because the main shipment of species, the one sent by Raffles to England, was destroyed by fire. On the other hand, the shipment from Diard and Devaucel arrived safely in Paris in 1824. And many of the species received by Cuvier in the museum were described in the famous Histoire naturelle des mammifères, or Natural History of Mammals, by Cuvier and Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire. Finally, we have not only species, but we have also a set of more than 100 drawings commissioned by Diard and Devaucel and sent to Cuvier, which are now preserved in the manuscript collection in the library of the museum. I will come back to them later on. So, in spite of this disappointment, the collection activity of Diard and Devaucel had a strong legacy. First, their names were given to animals of the region. For example, the Rurkervus du Vauquelin, which is a deer from India, and the Neophelis diardi, which is a leopard from Sumatra. More importantly, many more naturalists followed their path during the 19th century and until World War I. Even so, it was a British colony. Many professional or amateur naturalists went to study the living species of Singapore. They could be scientists, diplomats, traders, aristocrats having lasers, or they could be also famous explorers, such as Dumont d'Urville, whom you see here, and who conducted the first French expedition to the Antarctic. All these people participated in shaping the history, and especially the natural history in Singapore, and yet their stories are not described. This leads to our cooperation question. As a matter of fact, if we focus on the political history of Singapore, it conceals any French influence. But if we adopt a larger focus, and if we interest ourselves in other activities, the common history between Singapore and France appears more clearly. As such, a better knowledge of Singapore natural history, a better knowledge of how Singapore biodiversity was described is a great driver for cooperation. I will give you a few examples. As I already said, and as our audience in Singapore knows perfectly, the city was founded in 1819. Therefore, Singapore was celebrating its bicentenary in 2018. For this occasion, the National Museum of Singapore proposed an ambitious exhibition about the history of the city called An All New World, which is, by the way, a very nice title. Therefore, the National Museum discussed with the Museum of France of Paris how to recall the role of the French naturalists in Singapore, especially the role of Dia and de Vaucel. To that end, the museum sent 6 of the most beautiful drawings of Dia and de Vaucel, which were in the manuscript collection of the library. It was supposed to serve as a witness of the first description of Singapore biodiversity. We also sent 2 letters describing the collecting activity of Dia and de Vaucel. If you're interested in the exhibition, you can see a virtual exhibition by following the link here. And here you have some pictures of the plates from Dia and de Vaucel here and how they were displayed during the exhibition. Here you have other examples of the plates. You may recognize the pheasant, which was loaned to the Museum of Singapore, and other species. This loan actually initiated a series of initiatives to promote the cooperation between both countries, France and Singapore. There was a cooperation between institutions from Singapore, such as the National Library Board, the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum, and on the other hand, the museum in Paris and the French Embassy in Singapore. For example, the museum ensured the digitization of the more than 100 plates from the Dia and de Vaucel collection. Now they are accessible both through the Emanation digital library and from the digital library of the National Library Board. They are also preserved on Emanation servers as well as within the NLB digital repository. There is also a scientific description part, as the researchers from the Natural History Museum in Singapore were in charge of identifying all species described in the Dia and de Vaucel plates. This will help ensuring better metadata, descriptive metadata for all the collection. Another example of cooperation, which is also a research work as well as a promotion initiative, is that book, Voyager Explorator et Scientifique, or Voyagers, Explorers and Scientists, the French and Natural History in Singapore. It was published in November 2019. It's a co-edition between the museum in Paris and the Natural History Museum in Singapore. A bit like this presentation, it starts from the story on Dia and de Vaucel, and then it tells the tales of the French explorers and naturalists who traveled to Singapore. It also provides in the second part of the document a very thorough description of some of the species that were collected and described by a French naturalist. By the way, as we promote open science, it is freely downloadable online. Is that it? Well, I spoke about an exhibition, I spoke about a book. It's nice, it's scientifically great, but there are other ways probably to reach a larger audience. At least we may try. I want to show you now the installation called Revisiting Diane du Vaucel. It is an immersive video mapping installation which was designed by a French artist, Julien Nonon, who lived in Hong Kong. And it displays pictures from the collection of Diane du Vaucel drawings on Armenian Street in November 2019. The installation was held in the framework of the Voila Festival, which is organized by the French Embassy in Singapore. It was designed to be poetic, to be entertaining, but it was also designed to point out the beauty and the fragility of our biodiversity. I hope I managed to convince you that biodiversity literature offers great opportunities for cooperation. There are other projects to come, and among them there is another book on Diane du Vaucel plates, but this will be another story. For now, I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any question.